Thank you. Thanks very much for the introduction and thanks for the invitation. I wish I could be there, but unfortunately for a number of reasons that was not possible. This talk follows quite naturally from some of the things that were said in the previous talk. And in particular, I'll be talking about measurement, and which was mentioned as one of the policy implications, one of the first policy implications by the previous speaker. So I'll try to go into that in more detail. I should say that this presentation is based on a number of different projects and work that I've been doing with several co-authors, some of whom are mentioned in this slide. Talking about gender gaps is clear from this conference and from many other events that they've received quite a bit of attention recently. There's been lots of focus on gender gaps in the labor market. So how different women for the same jobs are paid from men, and the difference in labor force participation and the like. And they've been amply demonstrated, and people have been looking at the changes over time and the causes of that. But that's not the only thing. There are other, maybe more subtle, maybe more difficult to measure gender gaps, reflecting the women positions within societies and within communities. And also, as was briefly mentioned in the previous talk, within the household. Now, these gaps are related to social norms, to different kinds of behaviors, and the social and gender norms are very much ingrained in the social fabric, in the way we live in different contexts. So in order to understand these type of gaps, how they evolve over time and what drives them, it is really important to try to measure them and quantify them so that we can get a better understanding of that. So what I will do in these presentations, I will first focus most of my time on some work we've done in trying to propose a measure of bargaining power within the household. And we implemented that in different contexts. We first did it in North Macedonia. More recently, we did it in 2 different surveys in Tanzania, and I will talk about that. And then after that, I will try to discuss some new ideas that are not quite implemented yet, but we hope to do it soon. They relate to what I'll define as first and second order beliefs about bargaining power, and then extracting quantitative measures from structural focus groups discussions. And finally, if I have the time, I will discuss some interventions that might have changed some norms. And in particular, I will be talking a little bit about Lively Minds in Ghana and the graduation program in Uganda. So measuring women positions within the household. That position is important, I believe, because it's a first important determinant of women's position in society at large. And however, measuring where women stand, in the labor market is in a way easier. It's not trivial, but it's easier because at least you can look at wages, you can look at labor force participation. To try to measure and quantify what happens in the household or in the communities is hard, and for that reason, measurements is very, very limited. Now, there are many surveys that include batteries of questions aimed at measuring women's power in the family. Typically, for the DHS survey, for instance, ask, who makes the decision about children education? Who makes the decision about this and the other? The problem with that is a very coarse measure, and often the categories is, the husband and wife or both. In many contexts, lots of people answer both, and it's not completely clear what those answers mean. So here, what I would like to discuss is a new measure that we thought about a few years back, and we have implemented in a number of years, in a number of different contexts. And this is what we call the willingness to pay for to control resources. As I said, it was first proposed in a study that I have with Ingrid Almas and others in the Economic Journal. And we did it in North Macedonia. I'll show you some data on that. Then we did it in Tanzania in a more recent study. There are also some, this has been replicated and has been compared. There's the paper by Seema Jayachandra and others in World Development with different ways to obtain these measures. And this motivates to expand this work and validate these measures. So as I mentioned, many studies have looked at models of allocation of resources within households with many decision makers. And I think that's a very valuable theoretical contribution, the recognition that the decisions, the household is not a monolithic structure, but is made of different people that might have different power, different says. Now, once you write down this theoretical model and you want to bring it to data and see how relevant they are in reality, what people have done is try to learn something about what is the share of resources that different household members control by just looking at the household expenditure, which is the available data. So ours was one of the first attempts to derive an explicit measure of women position within the household. And then we can relate this measure to different outcomes. So what is this willingness to pay? A simple way, in practice is a bit more complex, but a simple way to illustrate that is you do a survey, a standard household survey, and then at the end of it, you might call the woman in the household and give her this type of questions. So here is a X amount, or it could be dollars, could be shillings, could be whatever money is relevant in that country. And we're going to give this money to your husband. Now, how much are you willing to pay so that we give it to you? When we implemented this type of survey, in some cases, this was real money. There was money put on the table, and so that's what we called incentivized questions. In some others, in other cases, was hypothetical. Suppose that we're going to give $20 to your husband. How much are you willing to pay so that we give them to you rather than to him? The actual questions are a bit more complex, and they involve a series of yes/no questions. I do not have the time to go into the details, although it's lots of fun. So, as I mentioned, the first time we did this was in North Macedonia. And the experiment measured this willingness to pay that women have. And the idea behind it is that the weaker the woman is within the household, the more she's willing to pay to get control of these resources. You see, if I tell her, I'm going to give you $100 to your husband, how much are you willing to pay? A woman says nothing. That might reflect the fact that she doesn't particularly care that the money goes to the husband, because she might have a fair amount of control of the total family resources. On the other hand, if she has next to no control, she might say, oh, I'm willing to pay $30. So you just give me $70 rather than $100 to your husband. So that's the general idea. And we did this in Macedonia. That exercise was interesting because the survey was within a randomized control trial. And that trial tried to establish whether it makes a difference whether some conditional cash transfers are given to the wife or the husband. And it was interesting because there were 100 villages. In 50 villages, the money was given to the wife. In 50 villages was given to the husband. And we had a large survey, and then this experiment, the willingness to pay. So both the survey data and the experiment allows to validate the willingness to pay measure. We had 786 interviews completed, a good amount, and that, as I said, they were saying they had to choose a certain amount X to pay to them, or Y to pay to the wife, and there were a sequence of these X and Ys to the point that we could identify the value at which they were indifferent. So that was what we define as the willingness to pay for control. The interview was carried in a separate room using a face-to-face strategy and a software interface. And the participant played 2 rounds. The first one was incentivized, was real money that was eventually paid, was the equivalent of about 2 days of work, so it was not trivial. And then a hypothetical, non-incentivized, that was worth 10 times as much. So how does it vary? On average, the willingness to pay was about 18%. So these women, on average, were willing to sacrifice 18% of the total amount to get control of the transfer. Introducing controls didn't make much difference to the distribution, which is the one that is shown there. And we obtained very similar results in the non-incentivized experiment, with a very high correlation with the incentivized one. Different groups have different willingness to pay. So a big distinction was between the ethnic Albanian ones and the other ethnicity. The distributions of willingness to pay are plotted there, and you can see they look quite different. The Albanians are much less willing to pay than the others. So the big validation exercise, however, wanted to see whether the RCT made a difference. So I have 50 villages. As I said, in 100 villages, in 50, the money is given to the women, the government transfer, and in the other 50 to the men. Is the willingness to pay different in these 2 sets of villages? And so that's what we do it. And the answer is yes. Giving the transfers to the women reduces the willingness to pay, i.e., increases the bargaining power of women within the household. There are other studies that have looked at this conditional transfer and the targeting to women in different countries, in Mexico, in Colombia, etc. In an indirect way, they show that the same thing, that it does make a difference who gets the government transfer. And you can see in this table here that it does change our measure of bargaining power in the expected direction. So given a government transfer to women increases the power. We also related to other stuff, which is the other indicators of women's power, like wife income share, and you can see how they are related in the expected way. Second experiment, we did it in Tanzania. There, the difference was that in the first pilot we did that, we also did the same exercise with husband. And if you compare husband and wives, there was a total of 67% 600 Tanzanian shillings, women on average were willing to pay 2,700 of those, husbands 600. So the difference is extremely significant and probably reflects the different bargaining position within the marriage. We also computed the standard measures, and with this decision-making factor, looking at all the various questions, who decides on what, and they are in the ways they are pretty correlated, as you can see on this one. And finally, for this experiment, we tried to relate our willingness to pay to actual decisions. So these are what we call parental investment. So buying of toys, uniforms, school fees, and the like. Resources that the family invests in their children. And you can, here we estimate different regressions. In the first one, we just control for total expenditure. And then we start introducing measures of tastes and beliefs that people have about the utility of this parental investment. And then we introduce this bargaining power, and you can see that it's strongly significant in many specifications. Which is at least to say that we're measuring with this willingness to pay something real. We might want to improve this, but that's a good measures. Now in Tanzania, we are doing a large RCT trying to evaluate different interventions on child development, and we are collecting all this data, including data on bargaining power. I want to skip that because I'm running out of time. I have this is the willingness to pay distribution we have in the RCT in Tanzania. This is the standard household decision-making index, and this is how they relate. And you can see that there is a quadratic relationship between the two of them. So they are measuring something slightly different that might both be useful. And indeed, when we correlated these measures of the women position with observable, like the rate of depression, participation in organizations, labor force participation, the amount of support that they receive from the community, they capture slightly different things, but they're both important. They are then related also to education and to religion. So a quick, do I have the time to do that? I'm running out of time. So the two different ideas. One is the first for new stuff in the future. The first is getting first and second order beliefs about willingness to pay. First and second order belief is that when you do a questionnaire, you first ask the respondent what they think about something. And then and that's the first order beliefs. And then you ask them what the people in your community think about that. That's the second order beliefs. And there have been some really interesting studies on these things, on the position of women, famous studies in Saudi Arabia on that. The idea here is to try to do the willingness to pay that I talked about directly, and then ask them how much the average woman in your village or in your community would be willing to pay for this. And then the second idea is to try to quantify a text from focus groups transcriptions using NLP, natural language processing algorithms, to try to capture what people say when discussing things in a room or in a village or whatever. I'll stop here because I don't want to go past my time, and apologize for not being able to talk about the last two things. I'll put them on the slide.